Hello, you're very welcome back to the Gilmore story and his new life in Massachusetts. We know now that he was homesick from those songs that I mentioned to you earlier, and how excited he obviously was in regards the arrival of his mother. I remind you of those details specifically because if you have ancestors from this period, they were going through the same emotions, same feelings. Home was still for them where they came from, and it would take them many years to acclimatize, to really feel like they were part of the land. So, for the majority of the people looking at this, don't forget about this aspect of the story, because this is as much their story as Gilmore's story in so many ways. Before I continue, don't forget to click like and subscribe. It'll really help the channel. Settling down in Massachusetts, Gilmore also had to contend with a lot of anti-Irish racism in Boston. Boston at this stage had a population of approximately 100,000 people, but each year there was roughly 30,000 coming in from Ireland into Boston at least. Now, whilst most of this 30,000 weren't settling in Boston, they were going to other cities like New York and Philadelphia and so on and so forth, but they were also going out west. But in addition to all of that, the Irish coming into Boston, for instance, in 1849 brought a huge cholera epidemic to the city. So people were worried about the Irish coming in. Could they be trusted? How would they react to the new society that they were coming to, which was a lot different from what they had left in Ireland? Would they maintain the standards that had already been set? Because Boston prided itself on how European as such the city was. As Roman Catholics, where their allegiance is primarily to Rome and not to Washington, and would, in that case, would they want to even overthrow the government of Washington and set up another government, for instance, in Cincinnati. In Gilmore's case, he was really raising his head above the parapet. But was this publicity really welcome? And I suppose, could it be dangerous? For instance, in 1857, when he brought his band to Washington at the invitation of the inauguration committee for President Buchanan, the incoming president, he was fortunate enough to get word whilst in Washington that there was going to be a welcoming committee back in Boston on the return to basically rearrange their musical instruments, if you understand me. Luckily he heard in time and he arranged for an earlier train to avoid any unnecessary conflict. Gilmore later on got another similar threat. I think it was on a trip to New York, and this time he decided not to be so diplomatic, and he brought his own team of able supporters with him to answer all questions posed by those who doubted his musicianship. These Bostonians that maybe had big difficulties with Gilmore and a lot of the Irish at the time, but they were known as the Boston Brahms, and were part of a new political system, a new political party known as the Know Nothings. Primarily called that because when an incident arose and was investigated by the constabulary. They would ask, you know, what do you know about this incident? And they would reply, we know nothing. So in Gilmore's case, he, in an effort to give himself, both the band and himself, some protection across the New England area, it was fortuitous that he was invited to join the Essex Lodge of the Freemasons, and he would remain a member for the next 2 years. But like more than half of their membership at the time, who were Catholic, he would maintain his allegiance to Catholicism loyally. However, he did enjoy and he did admire the discipline and the, I suppose, the love for country and the love for God that was expounded by Freemasonry at that moment. In addition, Gilmore would become involved in the local community military affairs. This was very important. When you came to a new town, you would be asked by the leaders of that society, were you interested in joining the local militia? And if you expressed a doubt, that doubt would be proportional to the doubt they would have in your loyalty to both God and country. So, in Gilmore's case, from 1852 to 1860, Gilmore was both the master of the band and the trumpeter at the Salem annual camps in August of each year. And so for this was for the militia in Salem, and so he participated in at least 14 different events for the local militias. His loyalty could not be questioned. Additionally, if all of that wasn't enough, Gilmore decided to add another string to his bow: publishing. He saw possibly a new market to be capitalized upon in the city of Boston and the area. It was a very young population. People were now getting more and more interested in music and playing music. He went into partnership with a man called Russell, and they built up a store and so on. We'll see that in a second. And he used this store as a headquarters for his band and for his bookings and management and so on and so forth. And this was his start of, I suppose it's not too extravagant a word to use even in these days, he was starting to analyze the whole idea of management and how to manage the business, because the idea was that he would have a completely professional organization, and he would have been one of the first to do so in America at this moment in time. Bands and music were key to attracting crowds at meetings all over the States. If you didn't have a band, you didn't get a crowd. It didn't matter who your speaker was. You could have Mark Twain, but without a band, it would be difficult to attract the crowd for Mark Twain to speak to. So, in fact, if you failed to book a good band, it didn't matter. It could detrimentally affect the success or failure of whatever speaking event you were organizing. And this was for military, for political, for civic meetings, didn't matter. Gilmore, as an example, in 1857 was asked to entertain the anti-slavery meetings across the region, and he would continue that for the next, I believe, 3 years. This was actually something that was really close to his heart, because he had experienced extreme injustices in Ireland, in Ballygar, and whilst it wasn't slavery, there was no civil rights, there was no effort to give any equality to people across the board, and everything that he had seen there could be translated into what he would hear at the slavery meetings. By 1859, he was well installed in the store with his partner Russell on 61 Court Street, and coincidentally that store, which I'll show you now, that store, let me see, that store is the little store here, and it says 61 on the side of it, and that's just around the corner from, I believe it's the Famine Memorial in Boston at this moment in time. It's only a couple of yards away from there. But that became his headquarters for the Boston Brigade Band, known as Gilmore's Band, or the Gilmore's Quadrille Band, or where he sold musical instruments, including his own specific make, Gilmore's grave instruments, and now he would even sell tuition books. Here's one of them. This beautiful little book. It would sit on top of your instrument, on top of the cornet, and for instance here we got the Astor House Polka, or a quick step, or later on, if I can find it, there's one to the Malay the Malay polka, and that would have been to a Freemasons organization that he was going to be involved with shortly. But here it says, first set, SETT, P S Gilmore's Brass Band Music, 61 Court Street, Gilmore and Russell, and they had another branch at 201 Washington Street, which would later on become the Center for Music Publishing in Boston. I haven't been to Boston, but isn't that somewhere around Faneuil Hall? So basically, this continued in 61 Court Street. And here that book shows how much of market he would have seen in this development. Don't forget to click like and subscribe down below, please. About this time, the Freemasons decided to make a trip to Richmond, Virginia, and talk to their brethren there and ease the tension that was rising about slavery and other issues in the country at the time. That trip was organized by the de Malay Commandery. I mentioned it in the little book. And for a number of days they met and they talked with their counterparts in Richmond. And whilst all of this was going on, P S Gilmore and his band entertained the city to great delight. The southern ladies and men loved their music to such a degree that on the last day of their visit, Gilmore was given a special presentation of a silver goblet, including these words which were inscribed on the goblet. Sadly, the goblet doesn't exist anymore, but those words were to commemorate the appreciation of his courteous and obliging disposition as displayed on this occasion. Later, in April of 1860, he had a very important booking to entertain the National Democratic Convention in Charleston, North Carolina. However, of course, again, the slavery debate again developed at the convention. Tempers and opinions clashed. The pro-union Northern Democrats and the pro-slavery Southern Democrats failed to reach any agreement or even compromise on the issue. Tempers and disagreements escalated, and suddenly the Southern Democrats decided to leave the convention, leaving the Northern Democrats annoyed and agitated. Disgusted that their Southern brethren had literally left the floor without the necessary quorum, tempers rose. These two groups had parted company, and for the next 8 years there would be a schism in the Democrats nationally. Now the way was open for the Republicans to return a candidate as the 16th President of the United States as a result of what happened in that Charleston Hall on April the 23rd, 1860. They shouted at Gilmore, "War, war, war," and then demanded, "Play La Marseillaise, La Marseillaise." And Gilmore and the band were on the stage, and he directed his band to play the following pieces: Star Spangled Banner, Yankee Doodle, and Hail Columbia in sequence, repeatedly until the last delegate left the floor a number of hours later. It was certainly one of the most exciting episodes of the closing antebellum days. Finally, in May of 1860, May 16 through 18, 3 weeks later, actually, in Chicago, the Republican National Convention took place in Chicago. And there, Gilmore entertained again. And there, at the famous Wigwam Convention, they selected an unknown lawyer called Abraham Lincoln as their candidate for President of the United States. Gilmore again continued to make his contacts within the Union political system, and less than a year later, having won the election, Lincoln was inaugurated as President of the United States of America, with Gilmore's band invited to perform in Washington. But, and this is a very important point, it is certainly not a stretch of the truth to say that P S Gilmore was one of the first who repelled the shouts of war almost 1 year before the first shots were fired on Fort Sumter by the Confederates. I'm going to show you pictures of both the Democrat and the Republican convention in just a moment. Before I do that, please don't forget to click like and subscribe, and it will help the channel. And thank you very much for listening to this as well. So we'll go to the pictures now, and thank you very much. Bye bye. And so, as I promised, here is the Republican National Convention in Chicago, and you can note by the ceiling that the ceiling was an unusual design, and I presume this is what gave rise to the name, the Wigwam Convention. And of course, this is the convention from where Abraham Lincoln and his running mate Hamlin were nominated to run for the presidency and vice presidency of the United States. Gilmore entertained there. And here is the Democratic convention in Charleston, North Carolina. Fine hall. I don't know if it exists anymore, but what I've tried to find out a bit more is there's references to Gilmore and the band being on the stage. Now, whether they were in the pits before the stage or on the stage, I'm not quite sure. I can't see them in this lithograph without any magnifying whatsoever, but you can get a feeling of the consternation that would have resulted as a result of the debate about, first of all, slavery, and then, of course, leaving the party without quorum to which they could elect candidates for the forthcoming election. So that's basically it. So we will talk to you later, and thank you. Bye bye.